Having signed the treaty and having carried out several other things within the reset framework agenda, we have achieved a better mutual understanding. How can we convert it in something of a substance in such particular area as European security? Because after all, NATO is a solution for those countries which are in, but NATO is not a solution for self-sufficient countries like Russia. What's to be done there?
Well, President Medvedev has put forward some ideas about a new security architecture in Europe. We're examining them. I take them very seriously. But I think that the most important thing at this point is to work with the institutions we have to see if we can rebuild the trust that for some time had been lost. So for example, I have been supportive of NATO-Russia consultation in a much more systematic way than has been observed over the last several years. My sense is that all the parties in Europe, all the members of the NATO alliance, want to have a strong cooperative relationship with Russia. There are certain core principles that we think have to be observed within that cooperative framework. A respect for territorial integrity of internationally recognized borders, a belief that a country's core sovereignty includes its ability to choose how it allies itself, a rejection of the notion of spheres of influence, whether it's US spheres or European spheres or Russian spheres. Within those broad principles, though, if you look, going back to your earlier question, the real threats against Russian well-being or US well-being, to a larger degree, are at this point much more aligned than they've ever been. It has to do with non-state actors, it has to do with the proliferation of nuclear weapons, it has to do with environmental catastrophes, it has to do with an integrated economy in which if you see a crisis in Greece taking place, that can affect world markets. These are all issues in which cooperation, rather than antagonism, are the order of the day. And I think President Medvedev recognizes this. I've been very impressed with him. I think he is a strong leader, a good man, very thoughtful. I find it very easy to do business with him, and I think we've established a relationship of real trust that can be hopefully bearing fruit in the negotiations and conversations that we have in years to come.
Use this opportunity now that you mentioned Greece and the economic crisis. I had a free day yesterday preparing for this interview, so I went fishing to Maryland. Met someone called Dave Schauber, I think, the captain of this yacht. So we discussed things. I caught a 24-pounder, but we also discussed things. He said to me that he's got 30% less clients, but then of course the fuel is up $1 per gallon. And I was comparing his economic comments with my position, and strangely enough, or luckily enough, I can actually afford more things in America these days because of the ruble, which is so stronger than comparatively than the euro and dollar were meant to be. Where do you see dollar, given the circumstances of the world economic crisis? Would you like to see a weaker dollar, although it doesn't sound nice for the American public, but still, internationally speaking, a stronger dollar? Where are you?
Yeah, my basic principle is to focus on the fundamentals of the economy. We have a market-based mechanism for determining the value of currencies. I think that if we have a strong U.S. economy, we're going to have a strong U.S. dollar. Obviously, we've just gone through a very difficult period. The whole world has. We've seen stabilization, and the U.S. economy is slowly strengthening in ways that I think if you had asked a year ago, we might have said that it was going to take longer than it has for that stabilization to take place. I am very concerned about what's happening in Europe, but I think it is an issue that the Europeans recognize is very serious. Greece is taking some very difficult measures. At least they've put forward a plan that calls for difficult measures. And if we can stabilize Europe, that will be good for the United States, and that will be good for Russia as well. But the key point today is the degree of integration among all economies. That's why I have said, and the United States is actively pursuing, the belief that the G20 framework is so important, that we have to recognize that China, Brazil, Indonesia, South Africa, all these countries that traditionally had been viewed as on the periphery of economic decision making, they're now at the core. India are huge economies, and what happens there is going to impact us in the same way that what happens in Moscow or New York is going to impact them.
So the G20 shall indeed substitute the G8.
Well, my belief is that there's going to be a transition period, but that the G20 represents the economic framework of the future.
Lastly, well, I'm so lucky to be in front of the US President, but still I have to ask one last question.
Yes.
The adoption issue.
Yes.
Well, I do not support those who say, well, Americans killing Russian children. This is not the case. The absolute majority of the children adopted from Russia live happy lives here.
Right.
Even more important is the fact that more and more Russians are adopting Russian children in Russia.
Right.
In fact, there are more Russians than Americans these days doing such things. But then still 17 kids have been killed, well, died in this country. It's easy an issue, especially after this American woman sent Artem Savelyev to Russia without just the letter. What's to be done?
Well, first of all, obviously, what happened with the small number of children who've been adversely affected is terrible, and we can't minimize what's happened. As you point out, there have been tens of thousands of Russian children adopted by U.S. families. The overwhelming majority are leading happy, healthy lives. But ultimately, the policy has to be what's best for children, whether they're living in Russia or they're living in the United States. What we've done is to set up a bilateral discussion between our State Department and counterparts in Russia to find out how do we create an agreement in which children are protected. And I think that's ultimately the goal. And as the father of two children, obviously it breaks my heart to think about children who've been vulnerable, have probably already gone through difficult situations and then are subjected to even more difficult situations than the past. But as you point out, I think it's also important to recognize that in the overwhelming majority of cases, adoptions are the absolute best thing for the child, and we want to make sure that we preserve the best of the system while eliminating these abuses.
Mr. President, thank you so much indeed.
I enjoyed it. Thank you.